There's a certain kind of audacity that only exists in suburban HOAs, and no one embodies that audacity better than Kerren, the self-appointed queen of the clipboard and destroyer of joy. You could say we've always had differences. I liked my yard filled with character, color, and life. Kerren liked beige flowers, beige fences, beige personalities. She once fined old man Thompson for having a garden gnome that smiled too aggressively. But I digress. This story, dear viewer, starts with a tree, a magnificent, towering, shady maple tree that had been on my property since before the invention of the HOA itself. It was older than Kerren's Botox treatments and twice as natural. That tree was the soul of my yard, the source of my hammock naps, the home to generations of squirrels with better family values than half our neighborhood. But one Thursday morning, yes, it's always a Thursday, isn't it? I woke up to the sweet, sweet sound of chainsaw. I stumbled outside in my slippers, half awake and clutching a cup of coffee like it was a life preserver, only to see three men in neon vests systematically dismembering my beloved maple like it owed them money. Kerren stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed like a general, surveying a battlefield. It was obstructing community sightlines, she said with a shrug that could curdle milk. I reminded her, firmly and with just a dash of language that would make a sailor blush, that the tree was on my property, and that no one, not even Kerren the Magnificent, had the right to touch it without my consent. She waved a form at me like it was a royal decree, some nonsense about neighborhood uniformity and shade-related hazards. I swear she had the soul of a vampire, terrified of trees that dared to provide shade. Now, a reasonable person might have tried to fight it through the HOA board, or file a complaint, or maybe even sue. But I'm not a reasonable person. I'm petty, I am creative, and most of all, I am done with Kerren. That tree wasn't just timber, it was a declaration of peace between me and the universe, and she chopped it down like she was logging the Amazon. So I decided in that moment that if Kerren didn't like trees, she was going to absolutely hate what I had in store. You see, while she thought she was pruning the neighborhood into submission, she had unknowingly declared war on the one man in this community who had both the time and the imagination to turn passive-aggressive vengeance into an art form. What followed was not merely revenge, it was ecological retribution. My plan, to transform Kerren's pristine HOA-approved regulation lawn manicured front yard into a full-blown, wild, unstoppable, vine-entangled jungle. That's right, not just some weeds or a bush or two. I'm talking tropical plants, fast-growing bamboo, ivy that climbs like it's training for the Olympics, and a sprinkler system rigged for chaos. She wanted order. I'd give her chaos. She took down one tree, and in return, I'd give her 50. Welcome to jungle justice population, Kerren. And you better believe the HOA never saw it coming. Now, planting a few shrubs would have been too easy, too obvious, and frankly too boring for a mission of this magnitude. No, I was going for drama. I wanted Kerren to wake up one morning, walk out in her power walk sneakers, and step into something that made her question reality. So I did what any rational, revenge-seeking adult would do. I went to a garden center and said the words, "Give me everything that grows fast, spreads faster, and looks like it belongs in Jurassic Park." The sales guy blinked at me like I was nuts, which I am, but then he nodded slowly and led me to the good stuff. Bamboo, elephant ears, creeping Jenny, morning glory, wisteria, and the pièce de résistance, kudzu. Kudzu, for those who don't know, is the plant equivalent of a middle finger. It climbs, coils, chokes out everything in its path, and is nearly impossible to kill. I loaded up my truck like I was preparing to terraform Mars. Then came the hard part, getting it into her yard without tipping her off. But Kerren was nothing if not predictable. Every Wednesday morning she left the house for exactly 2 hours to attend something called HOA Elite Women's Wellness, which I assume involves cucumber water, gossiping, and pretending they're not the villains in everyone's story. That was my window. During her next outing, I threw on my best generic landscaping guy outfit, complete with neon vest and a fake clipboard. If anyone asked, I was just part of the community green enhancement project. I even had a printed sign. The audacity of confidence, my friend. It'll get you far. I started with the backyard, laying down the bamboo along her fence line, weaving morning glory through her hedges, and planting elephant ears so big they could double as satellite dishes. I installed a drip irrigation system with a timer hidden behind her AC unit. Every evening at sunset, like clockwork, it would mist the plants just enough to keep them growing like steroidal weeds. Then I moved to the front yard. Here, I had to be subtle. I disguised creeping ivy and flowering vines as decorative border plants, and buried fastest sprouting seeds beneath her prized lawn gnomes. And just for fun, I scattered a few wild flower bombs under her bird bath, because nothing drives an HOA dictator crazier than unsanctioned color. Within a week, her yard had gone from Better Homes and Gardens to National Geographic Rainforest Edition. Kerren didn't even notice at first. That's the beauty of slow burn sabotage. She thought it was just a little greener than usual. Must be all the rain, she told someone. I smiled. Oh yes, Kerren, it's definitely the rain. But by week 2, the vines had begun scaling her mailbox. The bamboo was peeking over her fence like curious toddlers. Her perfectly trimmed grass had patches of something not grass. And the squirrels? They were multiplying like they'd received an eviction notice from my now barren tree and decided to take up jungle residency on her property. One even nested in her ornamental topiary. I named him Carl. By week 3, she came stomping to my house, clipboard in hand, eyes wide with panic, bangs frizzing with humidity. Do you notice anything strange about my yard? She asked, blinking like she was trying to unsee the creeping chaos. I feigned concern. Strange? Oh, you mean how lush and vibrant it's become? It's absolutely thriving. I offered her a plant cutting. She didn't take it. Instead, she marched back to her property, muttering something about invasive species and calling pest control. I chuckled into my coffee. Kerren thought this was overgrown. She hadn't even seen the night-blooming jasmine yet. That was phase 2. Phase 3 involved a fog machine and jungle animal sound effects, but that's getting ahead of myself. The important thing was this: I was winning. Every HOA notice she tried to write about unauthorized foliage backfired because, technically, none of the plants were in her yard when they started growing. They just migrated. Nature, after all, does not respect property lines. It was poetic justice in chlorophyll form. Her calls to the HOA board were met with polite confusion. It looks like natural growth, they said. We can't punish healthy landscaping. Oh, how the mighty were being swallowed, one creeping vine at a time. By the 4th week, it was no longer a yard, it was an ecosystem. Kerren's once pristine lawn had become a sanctuary for every squirrel, raccoon, bird, and possibly escaped zoo creature in a 5-mile radius. Her roses were swallowed by vines, her hedges were buzzing with mysterious jungle bees, and I'm pretty sure her garden gnome had developed moss. Somewhere along the line, the HOA's golden girl had become the living embodiment of what she despised most: disorder. And you know what made it even better? She couldn't prove any of it was my doing. Every time she tried to accuse me at an HOA meeting, she came off sounding like a conspiracy theorist. He's growing things that crawl, I tell you. The plants are alive. One board member actually snorted into his coffee. Another asked if she'd recently upped her antihistamines. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the concerned neighbor. You know, Kerren, I hear that kudzu can grow up to a foot a day. You should look into that. Could be invasive. So tragic, really. I offered to help. Yes, help. Trim back the greenery. Of course, every time I did, I accidentally cut the wrong thing or turned on the irrigation a little too long. Once I even introduced some edible mushrooms into her compost, strictly for authenticity. By now, her yard had developed its own weather pattern. The humidity lingered like a greenhouse. Frogs croaked at dusk, and some kids swore they saw a small monkey. I never confirmed or denied it. Kerren's nerves were hanging by a thread. She tried everything. She called landscapers, pest control, a botany professor from the local college. None of them could figure out how her yard had become the Amazon's angry stepchild. "It's like it's feeding itself," one guy said. I winked at him. He quit the next day. Then she brought in the big guns, an HOA emergency inspection. A team of 3 clipboard-wielding busybodies came to her property like they were investigating a biohazard. They walked through her yard cautiously, brushing aside giant leaves and ducking under vines like explorers entering a forbidden temple. I watched from my porch with popcorn. They left with more questions than answers. Their final report: "We recommend continued maintenance. The yard is technically within guidelines, albeit enthusiastically natural." Enthusiastically natural. I considered framing that. Kerren, on the other hand, had started twitching. I caught her one morning trying to spray Roundup on a patch of ivy that just laughed and kept growing. When I saw her dragging out a chainsaw, muttering to herself like a villain in a low-budget thriller, I knew we were reaching the climax. So I decided it was time for the grand finale. You see, while she was battling the plants above ground, I'd been quietly cultivating a little surprise underground. Wild bamboo runners, fast, sneaky, and relentless, just like me. And right on schedule, their shoots began popping up. Not just in her yard, but through her driveway, her patio, even her outdoor fire pit. Nature was staging a full-scale rebellion, and Kerren was losing the war. The HOA tried to intervene, bless their clueless hearts, but every action they took just made it worse. "We recommend concrete barriers," they suggested. "Try mulching," another said. "Mulch against bamboo? That's like bringing a feather to a sword fight." Kerren's house, once the model of HOA perfection, now looked like a reality TV crossover between Curb Appeal and Survivor Tropics Edition. And through it all, I remained the picture of innocence. "If only someone hadn't removed that tree," I said aloud during one HOA mixer, just loud enough for her to hear. It really kept nature in balance. She turned redder than a tomato at a salsa contest. By now, her mornings were spent hacking at vines. Her afternoons were filled with begging local nurseries for anti-invasion solutions, and her nights, I assume she lay awake listening to the gentle rustling of leaves plotting their next move. My tree may have been chopped down, but in its place I had grown an empire of green vengeance. And the best part, I hadn't broken a single rule, just bent the living hell out of them. It all came to a head one fateful Tuesday, the day Kerren finally snapped. I remember it clearly because the neighborhood group chat practically exploded. Someone posted a blurry photo of Kerren standing on her porch at 7 a.m. with hedge clippers in one hand, a tiki torch in the other, and a crazed look in her eyes like she was about to summon a forest demon. She'd had it, completely and utterly had it. Her voice echoed through the cul-de-sac. "No more plants," she screamed, swiping at innocent ferns like they'd personally insulted her. It was the HOA apocalypse, and she was the doomsday prophet. I watched from my porch, sipping an iced tea like the calm before the storm. But I wasn't done, not yet. You see, the final act of my little horticultural opera was still waiting in the wings. Earlier that week, I'd paid a visit to a friend who worked in stage design. I asked him to rig up a little ambience for Kerren's next HOA gathering, something to really sell the jungle vibe. He didn't disappoint. Hidden speakers in her flower beds began playing faint monkey sounds at dusk, complete with the occasional roar of a jungle cat. The HOA held a board meeting on her patio that Thursday, and I can only imagine their faces when a deep growl echoed from the bamboo patch and a toucan call blared from under her grill. One lady screamed, another dropped her sugar-free lemonade, and Kerren, she stood there, stiff as a lawn flamingo, blinking like she was trying to decode her own nightmare. The meeting ended early. The HOA issued a public statement the next day. "Due to unforeseen environmental anomalies, we are pausing all property inspections on Kerren's residence pending further analysis." Translation: they had no clue what the hell was going on and wanted no part of it. And that, my friend, was checkmate. But what made it truly delicious wasn't the chaos, the overgrowth, or even the monkey sounds. It was the look on Kerren's face when she realized she'd lost. She chopped down a tree without asking, thinking she was making the neighborhood more orderly, more visually consistent. But nature doesn't give a flying flamingo about visual consistency. You mess with one tree, you wake the whole damn forest, and I made sure that forest had claws. Months passed. The jungle never really left her yard. She tried everything: contractors, herbicides, even a landscaper from Florida who specialized in extreme foliage removal. Nothing worked. At some point, the vines became a local landmark. Kids started calling her house the Vine Temple. Tourists took selfies near the bamboo. And me? I just planted another tree in my yard. Taller, greener, gloriously shady. I named it Justice. Sometimes I sit under it in the evenings, sipping tea and watching the sun set behind the silhouette of Kerren's wild kingdom. It's poetic. Really, she took one tree. I gave her an entire jungle. And in the end, nature and petty revenge found a way.